Funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
When we transform Nebraska corn into ethanol, it doesn't disappear from the food supply. It just takes a little detour. Ethanol is made from the starch. The rest of the corn becomes livestock feed to create meat and dairy products, corn oil, sweetener, and other food ingredients, and maybe a little carbon dioxide to make your soft drinks fizzy. Homegrown ethanol helps satisfy America's hunger for energy and the world's appetite for feed and food. Nebraska's family corn farmers, sustaining innovation.
Market Journal, television for agricultural business decisions, is a presentation of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board.
Welcome to this week's edition of Market Journal. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. On this episode, Jeff Peterson tracks corn and soybean prices. Dave Aiken and Azzeddine Azzam look at livestock growth in designated livestock-friendly counties. Roric Paulman talks about crop water use efficiencies, and Kevin Korus outlines potential disease issues in soybeans. Jeff Peterson from Heartland Farm Partners is our corn and soybean market analyst this week. Condition ratings for U.S. crops are in favorable territory. In corn, the latest progress report shows scoring unchanged from a week ago and the best for this late in the year since 2004. The U.S. Department of Agriculture made slight improvements to the country's soybean ratings, and the percent of Nebraska's beans in good to excellent condition is better than any of the last 4 years. The agency is scheduled to release its September crop report Monday the 12th at 11 a.m. Central Time. Jeff joined us Thursday morning to discuss what could happen before then. We began by asking about current crop conditions.
You know, the current crop conditions, the crop looks good. There's a few problem areas. Over the last week or so, I've been traveling quite a bit areas. There's some problems out in Ohio and Indiana, and also back in South Dakota, but overall, when you hit corn crop rated 75%, it was unchanged for the week. That's really good nationally. As we dig into those numbers, Jeff, what we found going back to 1986, that'd be the 6th best corn crop rating out there. So that's really good. We look at Nebraska, though, it's about the 16th best crop. So, I mean, there's been better ones out there. Soybean crop is the one that I think I'm really looking forward to see what the yields are. You take a look at soybeans, we improved 1% from last week. We're up to 73%. That will actually, going back to 1986, is the best crop we've actually had on the rating. In Nebraska, not quite the case. The crop is rated better at 77%, up 1% from last week. But honestly, there's the 11th best one. So there's been better one out there so far. But overall, it looks like it's going to be a good one.
If you look at market movement over the last 2 weeks in corn and soybeans, it's not been good, but exactly what's going on here? Yeah,
you know what? It all started off with the crop report back on August 12th. We came out with USDA's corn number, a big one at 175.1, and then we come in at a 48.9 on the beans, and those were big numbers. But what was interesting is the trade's action. You know, that particular day, actually the market closed very well. Market traded down to 322.5 on the corn side, and over on the bean side, you know, with the trade we had there at 962.5, we thought that was actually putting in some lows long term. Now it did short term. What was amazing is over the next 7 days, the corn market went all the way up to 344.25. But then, Jeff, it reversed, and it's been been down since then. And actually, we came all the way back down to 314.75 yesterday. And starting with the corn first, you know, that's really all been a function of the funds. They've been continued to sell in here. The yield out there, initially, when you looked at how that yield compared to Pro Farmer's number when they came out, we thought that'd be a little bit supportive. So it's actually been a lot of fund selling, and the fact that I think even though the trade thinks the yields are going to come down, they don't think they're going to come down as much. What they're thinking.
Yeah, where do you think the market goes between here and the next crop report on the 12th when they could shift estimates again?
Yeah, I think the market's going to be kind of range bound in here in the short term. I don't think we're going to see it jump up out of here. We're looking for it to find a bottom in here before that report, because I think going into that report, I mean, everybody's going to be a little bit hesitant to take a new position.
If you're looking at some possible selling opportunities either before that report or going out into the 2017 crop, what's the advice?
Yeah, I think right near the biggest thing, and we've talked about this before, is this is a time to just be very calm and cool and patient. I would try to put off any sales if you can help it. There'll be better pricing opportunities down the road. I think between now and the crop report we have coming out in September, I think the market's going to be pretty range bound. It's trying to carve out a bottom in here. There's a few technical points we want to be aware of. When we fell down to the 314.5 area, that broke through a 318 area, and now we actually open it up down to the 296 area, but I don't think we go down there. And going back on the beans, when we fell through the 943 area and traded all the way down to 938, our next technical point would be 918. But we think fair value for both corn and beans is really right coming in these areas for the lows.
Yeah, I might have a follow-up below 3, but it goes off of this. Where are the funds at, and what does that mean?
Yeah, right now, Jeff, they've piled into this market hard. They're actually 221,000 short, and last time they were really this short, we'd have to go back to March of this year. So they've taken a pretty bearish bet on this crop. Beans just the opposite. They're still long 92,000 contracts in here. And I think their thought and what they're betting on is the fact they know it's going to be a big yield, but there's some big demand out there yet. And the stocks for soybeans, they're still rather tight. I mean, they're more abundant than last year, but they're tight enough that any little problem out of South America can go ahead and set this market heading higher.
If a futures price would fall below 3, does that trigger anything psychologically from funds?
Is
it too early to say?
Yeah, I think it's too early to say, but I don't think they want to pile into it there, okay. Honestly. It's very much a psychological point, but I don't think they'll pile into it and take it down, way down there. Now, you're going to hear individuals out there, Jeff, don't get me wrong, talking about prices down there, but we just don't think it needs to go down there for fair value.
More locally, how do you expect basis to move as we get closer and maybe into harvest?
Yeah, basis is going to be kind of the interesting one this year. And the reason I say interesting is that I don't think it's going to get as wide at harvest as a lot of people think. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of corn out there, and there's going to be a big crop. But what I think is that the farmer's going to do everything he can to keep from selling. And this is where it's important. The demand is strong, and the demand is front-loaded, meaning that there's going to be a lot of bushels that need to ship. There's going to be a lot of bushels that need to be fed and used for ethanol all during this last quarter. So once the farmer tucks these bushels away, it's going to be hard to get it out. I think we see some basis weakening going into harvest. So if you've got harvest bushels that need to move, you need to get that basis locked up. But if you've got basis you can wait on and not have to deliver till after harvest and you're out into November or December and later, you can go ahead and wait on that basis yet. There'll be better basis opportunities out there. And I think the same thing applies to the carry in the market. We're sitting around about 10.5 cents today on Dees. I don't think we're going to get out. We'd like to see it get out to 15 cents. I don't think it will. I think if you can get that carry from Dees to March out to 12 or 13, if you've got some hedges, roll those. On beans, honestly, we're not much better than a couple, 2-3 cents at the best. I think we got to be careful on that market. I think as soon as we get through harvest, we could start seeing that inverse or that market trade from the November on out to the January could actually trade at an inverse.
Next week, Roy Smith will join us to discuss corn and soybean markets ahead of the USDA's September crop report. Updated USDA projections released this week show 2016 U.S. net farm income is expected to fall 11.5% from last year to $71.5 billion. The agency believes crop receipts will slip nearly 4% from 2015, and receipts from corn sales will continue their tumble and sit almost 38% below the record high set in 2012. 2015 numbers show California led the nation in net farm income with $14.6 billion. Texas was second with $6.6 billion. Iowa, followed by Nebraska, then Minnesota finished out the top 5. In 2003, the Nebraska legislature created a program to label applicable counties in the state as livestock-friendly. Of Nebraska's 93 counties, 37 have been given that designation. Morrill was the first in 2005. A team of University of Nebraska-Lincoln researchers, including then graduate student Bryant Mills, along with professors Azzeddine Azzam, Dave Aiken, and Kate Brooks, recently released a report describing how those livestock-friendly counties have fared in livestock growth compared to counties without the designation. The study focused on the 21 counties in the program between the Ag Census years of 2002 and 2012. We talked with Azzeddine and Dave earlier this week in the East Campus Union to discuss the findings and started by asking about the background of the Livestock-Friendly County program.
It's a county that has requested designation as being livestock friendly from the Nebraska Department of Agriculture. They go through and look at the county's zoning policies to see if they are in fact, friendly to new livestock development, and if they are, then they get that Department of Ag certification, which then gets them, assistance from the department in terms of promotion, in terms of firms from outside Nebraska wanting to locate in Nebraska, that kind of thing.
Dave, how did the Livestock-Friendly program come about?
Well, livestock zoning is often perceived as a kind of a bottleneck in terms of livestock development in Nebraska. And so I think this was an attempt to try to go at it in a positive way to say, well, here are counties that are livestock friendly, so if you do want to try to expand livestock in Nebraska, these are the counties to look at.
So Azzeddine, how did you do the analysis?
Well, first we approached DEQ, you remember, to give us some much more detailed data about farms, but we didn't manage to get enough data to go back into history to find out impact. So what we decided to do is to go for the census data. And the census data every 5 years gives us the number of farms and what have you. And so we went back as far as 2002, 2007, and 2012. What we did is compared farm numbers before 2012 and after 2012. And but again, the raw numbers are not really the story. The story is how does one go about separating the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. Like, what is the role of livestock-friendly designation? And that has to do with methodology. Yeah.
And what's the reason to that? What are the results of the study?
Well, let me just pull back a little bit. If you just look at the raw numbers, okay? If you look at the raw numbers, anybody in support or against livestock-friendly designation can find a story. I mean, if you look at cattle numbers, they have increased. And if you look at hog farm numbers, operations, they have declined. So somebody that's in support of livestock-friendly designation can always say, well, look what it has done to cattle, or look what it has done, it hasn't made any difference to hogs. But then when you look at individual counties, there is a mixed bag. For example, Cumming, you see a net gain in cattle farms, but you see a net loss in hog farms. But Scottsbluff, there was a net gain in cattle farms and a net gain in hog farms. So how do you go about sorting out what is due to livestock friendly and what isn't, which brings me to the statistics, and we'll try to make it non-technical. Yes, it has resulted in increased farm numbers in the cattle side, but it has slowed down the rate of exit of hog farms. So in cattle, it looks like it has helped in the sense of accelerating growth. In hogs, it's not dying as fast. So livestock friendly also is positive for that industry.
So why?
We really do not know the mechanism. All we can tell you is that after you sort out all the other effects carefully, that affects entry and exit, like for example, hog prices, corn prices, presence of processing plants, whether they have ethanol, whether they're adjacent, all this stuff, about 25 variables. Anybody who is interested in the econometrics of this can go online and download the paper. But after you sort out, it's telling us, yeah, this has made a difference. In order to understand the why, we really need detailed data about the decision-making process of hog farms who exited because the county was not friendly, or the ones that have started a hog operation because the county has become county friendly. We hope that in the future, Dave and I could get much more detailed data and be able to answer your question, but at this time I really can't do that.
So Dave, a county that hears this and wants to increase their livestock numbers or is interested in trying to, how do they become part of the program?
Well, they can contact the Nebraska Department of Ag or you can go to their webpage and click on Ag Promotion, and they have a livestock-friendly page that has all kinds of information about the program, what their guidelines are, what counties, the process for the counties to submit applications and so forth. So it's pretty straightforward, and they want more counties to become livestock friendly. So they'll be very happy to talk to you.
You can find a link to the full report from UNL researchers on the Market Journal website. You'll also find a link there with more information from the Nebraska Department of Ag on the Livestock-Friendly County program. The condition of Nebraska's soybean crop improved over the last week. Nebraska's National Agricultural Statistics Service rates 77% in good to excellent condition, a point better than a week ago. Nebraska Extension's Kevin Korus talked Thursday about potential issues growers might want to be aware of.
Well, right now we're seeing a lot of sudden death syndrome pop up in kind of the southeast, south central part of the state. What I'm noticing though, which is interesting, is we're not necessarily seeing that typical firing, interveinal firing that we see on the leaves, but the plants that are coming into the clinic do display the really characteristic vascular streaking of the crown, and so we are seeing some sudden death syndrome. We had a wet early spring, and those conditions do favor both sudden death syndrome and the other disease that I'm seeing, which is stem canker. Not in very high incidence, but we are seeing it kind of in the central part of the state, east central. And what is characteristic about that particular disease is on the lower stems where the petiole meets the stem, you'll see a lesion, and that lesion may run up and down the stem a few inches, but rarely girdles the stem. So it doesn't girdle the stem like Phytophthora would, but you'll see these lesions, and that's another fungal disease that can be battled with tillage and crop rotation. However, there are several different weed species that host the stem canker pathogen, so weed control can also help in terms of management with that.
You can find more information about sudden death syndrome from a recent article on the Crop Watch website. We'll also link to that on the Market Journal homepage if you're interested in learning more. A little more than a year ago, we talked with Sutherland, Nebraska farmer Roric Paulman at a field day on his operation in western Nebraska. Roric serves as the board chair for the Nebraska Water Balance Alliance and has been active in promoting the use of water efficiency tools. At last week's Water and Crops Field Day held at the West Central Research and Extension Center in North Platte, we spoke with Roric again to discuss the potential benefits of using those instruments. We began by asking about the growing season in his area of the state.
What hasn't been hailed is good. Is it as good as last year? I don't think so. Just because, too wet, too dry, precip events, irrigation events, just trying to match those all up. It's been a challenge, but it's going to be a good crop.
At this time of year, tell me how you can find benefit from using water efficiency tools.
A lot of the differences in what cropping is here, in particular in western Nebraska, is we can irrigate, and our climate allows us to grow a lot of different crops with a great amount of quality. And so by doing that, it's allowed us to operate in a way that is, at one point was unencumbered, and now with regulatory challenges, with the consumer asking, what kind of water and where is that ending up in our food chain, those have driven a lot of the ways that we've changed how we do things on our farm. So it's all started historically with soil tests and what were we doing with those, and then water holding capacity, and it just kept, that framework kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and so we had to ask ourselves, how do we build a dashboard or a decision-making process that helps us be better stewards of the water and the resources that we have at hand? And so that has allowed us to put in soil moisture probes, that has allowed us to put in-field weather stations, that reference ET and measure precip at the field level instead of a single gauge at your farm and you assume that you had the same amount of rain a half mile away. That's not the case. But you're able to collect that data and make good decisions, and it's improving every day.
So for farmers that are still on the fence about using these kind of tools, can you walk me through a growing season and tell me what benefit you get from these in deciding how to use water throughout the year?
Well, a good example is your first irrigation. Is historically we would water a couple of times, get that seed in the ground, and gosh, we got to water. Then we'd have to, oh man, we need to kind of keep that damp. Well, we've backed our irrigations clear up into July. So historically, we probably would have put on an inch or two in that late May time frame all the way through June. And unless it's just bone dry and in a drought, we don't have to do that. And understanding crop characteristics, the genetics, the tools that they're handing us from that industry is also giving us better information about how a particular hybrid or a variety or a crop responds to irrigation. So once we got to that point and then making in-season decisions, that was the next challenge. So we used to only be able to get ET 30 miles away in Dickens, Nebraska. And it wasn't close enough. We needed to know field level ET. Well, we did it with a simple piece of PVC developed out of Colorado that gave us a close idea how much actual water at the field level. We used that, and then, okay, so we're pumping a half an inch off of, estimations of gallons per minute and delivery and all that, and evaporation. And now that technology is telling us in real time with water meters, with pivot delivery systems, with all of that, those components that really tell us how much water we're putting out there. So then, okay, soil types. We've always, we understood what they were, but did I know that there was 11 different kinds? And then throw in slope and elevation in the mix. And so you had runoff factors and all these things. And now you can map all of that. You can have satellite imagery, you can fly drones over, you can have low-level aerial flights that validate those decisions. And I think that uncertainty with putting that technology in play and those decisions that a farmer was making or a producer at that level, they're going, oh, whoa, they went out there finally at harvest and man, I burn up a section of the field. Well, how come I didn't know that? Well, now we can know that. There are ways to ground truth those decisions that technology is telling us that are the right thing to do.
Let's talk about water quality. Before we started, we were talking about some of the issues to the east in Iowa, and tell me what emphasis you feel like Nebraska farmers are placing on water quality and ensuring that it's there for years in the future.
Well, we're the #1 irrigated state in the nation. And so I think with that comes an expectation of what are you doing about it and how are you managing the conservation and stewardship of that resource. And so the awareness of water quality. So, they've always measured for nitrates. They've always looked at, livestock, how do we all contribute, municipal waste and sewer water separation, all those things. So we're all part of a huge system that we got to a finger pointing stage, and now we're all going, hey, we can do this together. So can we put waste out on your field and then use that and can you get a benefit from that? And so all of those conversations now happen in a lot of different places. So you look more at it as a systems approach. And so that awareness as well has been very positive and in a beneficial way to the state.
We'll have more from the West Central Water and Crops Field Day next week when Nebraska Extension's Greg Kruger joins us to discuss winter annual weed control. The September Nebraska Farmer says you've probably heard about that place on the West Coast where many of the world's high-tech corporations and tech startups are found. But this month's magazine says there's also a Silicon Prairie where Midwest states like Nebraska, Iowa, Missouri, and Minnesota have become home to a number of startups in various fields related to technology and, not surprisingly, agriculture. You can read about some of those ag-related startups in the September Nebraska Farmer. Now, with this week's weather forecast, here's Nebraska Extension ag climatologist Al Dutcher.
Well, folks, here again for the weekly forecast. During this last week, of course, we've seen some scattered thunderstorm activity, particularly across southern Nebraska, with the heaviest of the cells that we reported during this last 7-day period centered over the region of south central Nebraska, essentially in the Blue Hill area, up to just south of Hastings. There was about a county and a half total area where we received anywhere from 3 to upwards of 7 inches of moisture. Outside of this region, 1 or 2 inches was common in the surrounding region. And then we had some isolated pockets of heavy precipitation scattered throughout southeastern Nebraska. So that did make some big changes in the drought monitor. But before we get to the drought monitor, let's take a look and see how the precipitation fell out during this last month. Now, I know this is a little bit difficult, but most of the heaviest precipitation was across eastern Nebraska, indicated by these dark blues. We had anywhere from 2 inches in some areas up to 10 inches of moisture, just depending on if you're under one of the heavier thunderstorms. But I want to draw your attention to a very wide swath from southwest Nebraska all the way through north central Nebraska, where most locations have failed to receive even an inch of precipitation during the month of August. And this is an area that was just recently upgraded to abnormally dry conditions. And we'll see that with their most recent drought monitor depicting the worst of the drought conditions over south central Nebraska, although we've had some significant improvements. Here's that expanded area that was just introduced of abnormally dry conditions. And I'll turn your attention to the Panhandle, where most of the drought has been eliminated, and we've shored up the area basically to near normal conditions over the southern half of the Panhandle, and the northern half of the Panhandle has now moved to abnormally dry conditions. Now, in terms of what is going on presently, we have a trough to the west of us, and then of course we have this energy left over from Hurricane Hermine that is now situated in the mid-Atlantic region, is expected to move slightly toward the northeast and then kind of stall out for a couple days. But in our region, we're looking at, just in the southeast and south central part of the state, we're looking at a little bit of lift and some chances for thunderstorm activity, although it will decrease over the next 24 hours as we start to see ridging take place at the surface. With that big trough to the west, it doesn't look like we'll see much in the way of significant moisture as we go through Sunday. And as we go into Monday, we'll see that basically in the southwest and northeast flow, and that's therefore not much in the way of significant moisture. These blues indicate subsiding air. So we will see temperatures slightly increase, but we're not expecting any significant heat. And as we go into Tuesday, this trough starts to approach our region, so we should see some thunderstorms developing, particularly across the western half of the state. Some of that spreading eastward during the overnight hours and moving into eastern Nebraska on Wednesday morning. And here you can see a little other piece of energy kind of shooting out into the northern plains. So there's going to be several rounds of thunderstorm activity. And more importantly, as we get into Thursday, now we start to see the trough making a move to eastern Nebraska, and our precipitation chances are probably going to increase rather significantly as we go into the late portion of the week. Here's that trough starting to make its inroads into eastern Nebraska and western Nebraska, bringing in much cooler conditions and precipitation. We could actually see a little bit of scattered precipitation for the game on Saturday night. And as we look at the 8 to 14 day forecast, cool conditions will continue, and in terms of precipitation, well above normal precipitation from next Thursday through the following Tuesday.
Thanks, Al. Today's interviews are available individually on the Market Journal website and through the Market Journal mobile app. They include information on corn and soybean markets, livestock-friendly counties, water use, and sudden death syndrome. As always, you can keep up with Market Journal during the week by following us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Next week, Roy Smith will be our market analyst, and Greg Kruger will talk about weed control after harvest. Until then, thanks for watching. I'm Jeff Wilkerson. We'll see you next week.
Join Market Journal online at marketjournal.unl.edu. You can also follow us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Promotional support is provided by the Nebraska Farmer Magazine, and major funding for Market Journal is provided by the Nebraska Corn Board. Market Journal is produced by the University of Nebraska-Lincoln's Institute of Agriculture and Natural Resources.